PH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo. And are you building a janky deck or any sort of fringe theme? If you are, of course, it can be difficult. And I'm here to help it be less difficult. I'm going to give you guys some ideas of things you can do while using a real world example of a deck I made recently to sort of paint the picture that I can help you guys with your janky or fringe theme. A big thing with janky and fringe themes is you're doing one of two things. You're either doing a janky fringe tribe, let's say, for example, where there isn't really a whole lot of support, or you're doing a secret commander thing, or I'm building around this card in the 99, or maybe a couple of cards in the 99, like a Baron Glory, for example, right? That would be a fringe janky theme that, of course, it's difficult to do. I mean, it's hard to win a game with a Baron Glory all around, of course, because at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control no permanents other than Baron Glory and have no cards in hand, you win the game. So there's a bunch of things you got to build around, but also it's one card in the 99. So you have a couple of hurdles you have to get over here, right? I made a deck recently with Worldfire where I sort of went over the process. If I'm building a janky deck, what's the process I'm going to use when building around a card like Worldfire in the 99. And of course, this video is going to be very similar in that way. And there's a couple things you can do to make your life a lot easier. First of all, I have to come up with how I'm going to win with my Worldfire. And I recommend if you are making a Worldfire deck, make sure when you cast it, you're then winning the game, or else your opponents are going to be really annoyed with you. So of course, it's going to exile all permanents and exile cards from all hands and graveyards, and each player's life total becomes a 1. And what I said is, okay, well, I'll put a Goblin Chain Whirler in there because, or creatures like that. I have my Goblin Chain Whirler, which is essentially the win con for that deck that pairs up with the Worldfire, because when it comes into play, it's going to deal 1 damage to each of my opponents. So of course, their life total is 1, and then they all get hit by my Goblin Chain Whirler, and they all die, and I win the game, right? I got to Oblivion Ring that Goblin Chain Whirler, of course, because that's going to save me casting it on my turn. I got to exile cards out of my hand, right? There's a whole bunch of hoops to jump through here. So if I Oblivion Ring my Goblin Chain Whirler, so it came down earlier in the game, then I Oblivion Ringed it, and then when I Worldfire, the Oblivion Ring gets exiled, the Goblin Chain Whirler comes back and wins me the game. So because I have to do the Oblivion Ring effects, and because I have to do the Goblin Chain Whirler effects, okay, well now I can build around that. Again, when you're building around this janky theme, or this card in the 99, you should do it in a way so that you can actually possibly maybe win the game without getting that card. Maybe someone is going to exile it, or, maybe they'll extract it from your library or something like that. Now what do? It's nice to have at least a little bit of a backup plan. And also because I have to build around how I'm going to win with that card, just like you would with a Baron Glory or with anything else, now I can build around the theme that I've built around that card, right? So I have lots of these creatures that when they ETB, they deal damage to my opponents. So I can do a little bit of an ETB blinking theme here as well, right? Obviously, the Oblivion Ring also works with those kinds of effects. So that's what I did in that deck. I'm also dealing non-combat damage to my opponents. So now I can build around that as well, right? I can put a Chandra's Spitfire in the deck so that my Goblin Chain Whirler, which is typically not a fantastic card in a commander game, when it ETBs, it'll do 1 damage to each of my opponent's creatures, and also it will deal 1 damage to each of them. And when it does, my Chandra's Spitfire will get +9/+0 until end of turn, right? So I can put stuff in there that are working with the theme that is then working with the more fringe janky thing that I'm doing in my deck. So I'm, first of all, not just sitting there spinning my wheels and not really doing anything until I get that one big payoff that I'm looking for, but also it's a bit of a backup plan if my ultimate goal is somehow foiled. I am applying all of this strategy to a really janky deck idea I came up with a long time ago, Grim Reminder. This was in, I think, my second or third 10 deck ideas video. It was my challenge edition where I was really throwing out some difficult things to build around. And this was one of those secret commander or cards in the 99 that I'm building my deck around. It is a card that I'm sure no one has ever seen in a commander game before, but it could be an interesting way to win a game. So 2 and a black instant. Search your library for a non-land card and reveal it. Each opponent who casts a spell this turn with the same name as that card loses 6 life. So that's how you're going to win. The idea here is I'm going to win the game with this card. Now, of course, your opponents are going to be losing lives in lots of other ways, but smacking in the face for 6 damage is pretty good. Even in a commander game, not bad. Of course, it's doing the same name thing. So your opponent has to cast a card that you have in your library. And there's a lot you can build around here. The suggestion I gave there is you could just build a good stuff deck, right? There is a couple of upsides to this strategy. The first upside is I'm just going to be playing all the most popular cards in the format because, of course, that's the likelihood that my opponents are going to play them, right? Of course, I'm going to have a Soul Ring in my deck. This is the one place where I would actually play that because, of course, it's the most popular card in the format. It's likely my opponents will play one. And when they do, I go search my library for one and I can reveal it and they will lose 6 life. The other big advantage here, of course, is I can pay black and a black, return Grim Reminder from my graveyard to my hand, activate only during my upkeep. So, of course, it's not just a one-shot. I can keep reusing it over and over and over again, right? So I use it on my upkeep, but get it back to hand. So once I get it in hand or get it in my graveyard, that's when I can start repeating the process here. And in fact, the return from graveyard thing even makes it easier for us to go get it. I can use any Entomb effect to throw my Grim Reminder in my graveyard and then on my upkeep, pay 2 black, get it into my hand, and then start the process, right? Oracle Lore Mage is a repeatable way to do that, which funny enough, will work with all the other things we are doing in our deck here as well. I actually did build a deck around this card. It's kind of funny how things happen. I got revisited with this card recently because of another deck I was putting together, and I thought, you know what? We could actually build a deck around this card because, again, despite the janky theme that we are doing here, the fringe theme, there is actually a few things that this card is doing. Other than the thing you obviously want to be doing with it, there are 2 things that this card is doing really, really easily that you can build around a little bit. Not a lot, but build around a little bit. One of those things is it's leaving your graveyard repeatedly, right? Because you can return it from your graveyard to your hand very easily, you can have it go to the graveyard, and of course you can cast it. And if you cast this card and your opponent hasn't played something with the same name as in your library, it's not going to do anything, but you can still cast it. You just cast it, look for a swamp in your library, reveal that, aha, ha, ha, and then throw it in your graveyard. So it's really easy to get this card in your graveyard so that you can then return it from your graveyard to your hand. And why would you want to do that? Because, of course, it works with a card like a Tormod, which will be the commander for this deck. Because whenever one or more cards leave your graveyard, create a tap 2/2 black zombie creature token. So if our Grim Reminder is in our graveyard, and again, that's why the Oracle Lore Mage and all these other cards, the Entomb effects will work here in this strategy as well with everything else we're doing. Because I can also throw a Gravecrawler in this deck, right? I can also throw a Reassembling Skeleton in this deck. Again, that's the strategy that works with the thing that we're trying to do, but also can work on its own, right? I don't need my Grim Reminder in order to entomb a Reassembling Skeleton and then return it from my graveyard to play and then trigger my Tormod with that, right? All of that works just fine even without the Grim Reminder. That's what I'm talking about here. Let's find this other strategy that works with the thing I want to be doing, but also it can work on its own. It doesn't require me to get that one card. Of course, we don't want to pay just 3 mana just to chuck this in our graveyard. We can very easily do it with any discard outlet. Matsalantly or something like that. There's a card that we can just loot with, and of course, just chuck our Grim Reminder and then get it back. And it actually is pretty good value. Again, that on its own. You can throw Grim Reminder in any discard strategy, and it's essentially 2 mana draw card because I discard it with my looting effect, and then on my upkeep, I pay 2 mana to get back so that I can just discard it again, right? It's just a free card to discard over and over again, so it essentially becomes 2 black mana to draw a card, which ain't bad. And of course, every time we're doing that, we're getting the leaves the graveyard trigger, which will make us a zombie. That's actually not bad value. Again, just doing that on its own. I discard my Grim Reminder, get it back on my upkeep. I'm essentially drawing a card, and I'm also creating a zombie. That's not bad for 2 mana, right? The other card that will work here, because this is going to be a black-green deck, is Willow Geist. And this is where I came up with this idea. I was actually doing a sort of leaves the graveyard strategy for myself, and I thought, you know, it's funny. A card like Grim Reminder that you can constantly getting back from your graveyard to your hand actually works in this strategy. And I just thought I would revisit the idea and build the deck actually around it. So Willow Geist says whenever one or more cards leave your graveyard, put a +1/+1 counter on Willow Geist. So of course, every time we get that Grim Reminder back, this guy will keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Now, unfortunately, those are the only two cards, both our Commander and Willow Geist, that work with any card leaving your graveyard. There's a lot of other ones that work with creature cards leaving your graveyard, which of course will not work with Grim Reminder, but will work with the other things we're doing in our deck. Again, we're already doing that theme. So Insidious Roots is going to work here because we're also going to have the Reassembling Skeleton and the Gravecrawler and those creatures that when they leave the graveyard, they will trigger our Insidious Roots and we will get a 0/1 green plant creature token and put a +1/+1 counter on each plant we control. So again, it's just synergizing with what we're already doing in our deck. I know it's not working exactly with the Grim Reminder, but the Reassembling Skeleton and all that stuff is working with the Grim Reminder and the Tormod, which is also working with Insidious Roots and all that, right? So it does all synergize pretty well together. Yes, you can play this deck entirely without ever using Grim Reminder, but it's kind of funny to actually be able to use it, right? That's kind of what you're going for, is you're just playing your deck. Again, I'm building around Grim Reminder here, sort of, but I can just sit here playing my deck. My opponents don't even know I have a Grim Reminder in my deck. And then, wouldn't you know it, somebody cast an Arcane Signet and I'm going to go search my library for an Arcane Signet, and that player's going to lose 6 life. That's actually not too shabby. I will also point out, if you're doing this strategy, and of course what I did in this deck as well, is you need a Telgiad Stylus or something like that, because what if I already played my Soul Ring or my Arcane Signet? It's already in play. My opponent just played that card, and now I can't go search my library for it with my Grim Reminder because, of course, it's already in play. With a Telgiad Stylus, I can tuck it on the bottom of my library and then go search for it. I know it doesn't seem great to tuck your Soul Ring on the bottom of your library, but to have your opponent lose 6 life, I think it's pretty worth it. Same goes in Graveyard, right? You're going to have, of course, all the popular ramp spells in this deck because this deck is black and green. So I have a Rampant Growth. It's entirely likely my opponents will cast one at some point in the game, but I already cast one on turn 2, and now it's sitting in my graveyard. Well, now I need effects like a Junk Troller to, in response, tuck that Rampant Growth on the bottom of my library, so on the end step or whatever, now I can cast Grim Reminder, go search for it, reveal it, and that opponent that cast a Rampant Growth loses 6 life. That's the game plan here, right? So we have to build around that as well. I will just point out we need a partner commander here. It really doesn't matter the one you use. I guess, again, you could just pick the partner commander. We need green, obviously, but you just pick the one that you think you can build around more if you want to. It really doesn't matter. You can use any partner commander that has green. The only commander that really matters here so much is Tormod because, of course, it's getting us those triggers off of stuff leaving our graveyard. But there is something else we can build around here. Again, Grim Reminder is actually doing something else, funny enough, even though it doesn't look like it. Other than what it's supposed to be doing, is doing something else. And what it's doing is it's searching your library. It's very easy to repeatedly search your library with a Grim Reminder. Now, why would you want to do that? You want to do that to trigger your Panlacial Wurm. I don't even think it's a triggered ability. It's just an ability that exists. I guess it's a static ability. While you're searching your library, you may cast Panlacial Wurm from your library. Now, of course, I do have to pay 3 mana for my Grim Reminder, and then another 7 mana for this guy that is 10 mana. But it's another funny thing that we can do here. Our Grim Reminder is just a way to search our library, even though, again, we're going to look for whatever, who cares? It's just a way to get our Panlacial Wurm out of our library, and then we'll have a 9/5 trampling creature on the battlefield. Not too shabby to help us close out the game. So that's sort of the alt win con here as well, I guess. I mean, Grim Reminder itself is an alt win con, but Panlacial Wurm is going to kind of help us along the way. I thought since we're doing this janky fringe strategy, why not throw this guy in as well? It is a deck that, of course, will work without any of the stuff that is going on here with the Grim Reminder. You don't actually have to cast your Panlacial Wurm. You can just keep casting Gravecrawler from your graveyard and make a bunch of zombies, I guess. So the deck actually does work. It is a very viable deck, but at the same time, we're doing these fun, interesting, janky things. I'm actually going to hit my opponents with a Grim Reminder from time to time. And how many super popular cards do you want to play in this deck is entirely up to you. Your Soul Ring, your Arcane Signet, your Rampant Growth, your Eternal Witness, Sakura Tribe Elder. Again, we're playing black and green here, so you're going to have some of the most popular cards in the entire format in your deck. You got to have the Telgiad Stylus in there to put cards into your library. You got to have the Junk Troller and effects like that. You could just throw a Blessed Respite in here. Anything that shuffles your graveyard into your library. I mean, that's already a good thing to do. Elixir of Immortality, right? Those are cards you're already going to be wanting to put in decks because they're just good in Commander. But also, if my opponent casts that card that I already happen to have in my graveyard, I can respond by shuffling my graveyard into my library, and then I can go search for it with my Grim Reminder. And just being able to do that, right? That's sort of like an achievement unlocked sort of scenario where actually getting to use a Grim Reminder, even if you only use it once or twice in an entire game. And again, I just kill my opponents with zombie tokens, but just hitting your opponents once or twice in an entire game with a Grim Reminder, that alone, I think, is sort of an achievement unlocked sort of scenario. I would love to do that in a Commander game myself. So we're taking this really janky idea, really fringe idea of I'm trying to build a deck around Grim Reminder, which I'm sure no one has ever done in the history of Commander before, but we're using what this card is doing to work with the other things that we might be doing in our deck, right? That's sort of the overarching, I guess, lesson of the day here is if you're doing this strategy of I'm building around a super janky card in the 99, okay, well, what else is it doing? Is there something else going on here that I can also build around that so that if my main game plan isn't working, at least I'm not spinning my wheels. I have something else I can do, right? That's the big point I'm trying to get across here. I do have a deck list for this in the description below if you want to run with it. And of course, if you just want to take this idea and make it your own and do maybe a little bit different than what I was doing, you can do that as well. I think it's a really neat idea. Also, lesson of the day here, try to figure out something else you can do that will work around this janky fringe thing that you are doing so that your deck's a little more consistent. And, you know, playing a janky deck is fun, but winning once in a while is fun as well. That is it for today, though, and thanks for tuning in.